Said it was working.
Yes.
Let's go ahead and see if
Definitely has
it's
a green
telling me the
thumb.
truth. All right. Good. Technically afternoon, since we had a small technical delay. It's good to see everyone, and especially those who have returned from their extended absences, because we are beginning a major section in the Torah. We begin in this week's parasha of Lecha with the story of, well, who are these people? All right, so we're starting off with Avram, or you'll also see it done, if I can write one word at a time. You'll see Avram, which will also be sometimes be written with a B,
Right.
Avram. But of course, most people know him better as Abraham, who is also known as Avraham. Sarai is a little bit easier because we don't get a whole bunch of options, but of course, she eventually becomes known as Sarah. And please feel free to use either names. Right, at this point in our story, they are still called Avram and Sarai, but they're eventually going to be Abraham and Sarah, and it's okay to refer to them by either. I don't want to get caught up in the whole naming convention of, wait, how do I comment about these people? What do we know about them? Because we did get a little bit about them in the last parasha.
Well, Sarah doesn't have any children. They're
All right.
married. Abraham's father is
Terah. Right, Tehran is
Haran.
the capital.
I got confused with Tehran and Haran.
Ah,
and
right,
they
right.
moved to Haran and he dies there.
Exactly. And Abraham and Sarah are married, but because we are told that she is barren, they have no children at this moment.
And she's also very beautiful.
Well, we haven't heard that yet,
Oh,
but
that comes later.
we are about to. And in fact, we're going to be talking about her beauty quite a lot right now, or quite a lot today. But we find out that they've been married for a good long time. They have no kids, and all of a sudden, God has told them, "You're going to be moving on," and that's where we pick up our story. Make sense? Okay. So we are on right at the beginning of Lecha, chapter 69.
Or, no, page 69.
Sorry. Page 69, chapter 12, verse 1. Book of Genesis or Bereshit, depending upon how your book does its headings. All right, and I need a good volunteer with a good loud voice.
The Lord said to Avram, "Go forth from your native land and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and curse him that curses you. And all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you."
All right. Sounds like a pretty good offer, right? Going into a new land, we're going to have a great nation, and we are going to be, more importantly, a blessing. And as an aside, overall, this promise has been fulfilled. God does make good on this promise and still is making good on this promise. But we're going to continue.
Avram went forth as the Lord had commanded him, and Lot went with him. Avram was 75 years old when he left Haran. Avram took his wife Sarai and his brother's son Lot, and all the wealth that they had amassed, and the persons that they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan. When they arrived in the land of Canaan, Avram passed through the land as far as the site of Shechem at the Terebinth of Moreh. The Canaanites were then in the land.
All right. So Avram does as God asks. He takes all that he's gotten, and apparently he and his wife and his brother's son, Lot, are doing quite well for themselves. And they move it all down to Canaan. Sounding good so far. And geographically, it is a downward move from Haran, which would be in where modern-day Syria is, coming down into the land of Israel from the north. Right? Because no one crosses the desert that's directly to the east. Well, not if you can avoid it. Onward.
The Lord appeared to Avram and said, "I will assign this land to your offspring." And he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he moved on to the hill country east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east, and he built there an altar to the Lord and invoked the Lord by name. Then Avram journeyed by stages toward the Negev.
All right, so where's the Negev in Israel? The southern area, right? So where did I just say he came into the country from?
The north.
The north. So what's he doing? What's Abraham doing?
Marking out the territory.
Marking the territory, right? He is walking his land, right? It's imagine that you have just purchased a new ranch in Montana. We were just talking about Montana beforehand, right? You would make the purchase, and what would be one of the first things you would do? Go out and make a circuit of your land. See what's out here. Because when you purchased it, you probably didn't walk every square foot before you put down your deposit. You probably looked at the overall land and said, yes, this is good. I'll sign up. And then you go out and want to get to know it. And that's exactly what Abraham is doing here. He is going through the land as a symbol of possession, as a symbol of gratitude to God as he makes altars throughout his journey, and as a symbol of just getting to know what is going to be his inheritance to pass on to his children. Make sense? Good, which is why the next verse is shocking.
There was a famine in the land.
Pardon?
There was a famine in the land. Here, have this great land.
Well, yeah. Well, hold on a second, Kathy. Spell that out a little bit for us. What's the problem that you're noticing?
Well, he's given this wonderful land that's going to go to is his inheritance for his children, and the very first thing he notices, which he doesn't have yet. But even so, he's going to be blessed. He's going to be a great people, and the land is as barren as his wife.
As barren as his wife. It is actually a very good way of driving home the problem, because we know that he said, I'll make you a great nation and I'll bless you exceedingly. And apparently blessings of kids and the land that he's gotten aren't much of a blessing at the moment, which is rather depressing. Right? He's just arrived. He's just checking out the new territory and getting a feel for all of this land. And all of a sudden, it's time to go. Like, I just got here. Can you?
He discovered the famine in his wanderings around the land, or?
Well, when the food became short, yes.
I mean, was that one of the purposes or one of the results of his tour of the land?
You mean if he had stayed put in another part, would he have been able to avoid?
Have discerned that there was a famine.
The general impression is that, as we're going to see, is that it was a land-wide. That all of Canaan was in famine at the time, because otherwise what he does next would make no sense. Because if there was food back in the north, then presumably he would just go back to the north to the food. But he doesn't choose to go north. He chooses instead, as we keep reading.
And Avram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. As he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, I know what a beautiful woman you are. If the Egyptians see you and think she is his wife, they will kill me and let you live. Please say that you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that I may remain alive thanks to you.
All right. So he's heading to Egypt. And what's the problem?
He's afraid for his life, that his wife is so beautiful. And get rid of the husband and the wife is yours.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going into apparently what he thinks is a dangerous place, and he's worried for himself because pretty women all around the world, it's an opportunity for violence, to kill him and take her.
And he isn't worried about her and her well-being.
Is he or isn't he?
Well, he seems concerned about himself. And if they think she's not married, they may think that she's available.
So to speak.
Yes.
Right. So he's protecting himself. He's not protecting Sarai.
Well, let's get down to that. All right. So because this is a big conundrum, right? And we've got a number of them to start with. And some of it is, just keep passing that way. Some of it is going to be looked up by our commentators who are looking at the text a little bit more carefully than our translation. But first, let's just deal with this overall issue of why did he have to leave in the first place? Because that in and of itself seems problematic.
It mirrors exactly the same thing as the
return to Egypt, it's
Are you reading ahead?
No. But it's like a foretelling.
It's foreshadowing.
Yeah.
Very much like a foreshadowing, as Ramban, our commentator, is going to say, almost in exactly those words.
And it also has to do with deception on the part of the Hebrews.
Yes, and it also has to do
which
with
is also
the danger.
Foreshadowing.
Yes.
It's like a very skilled novelist wrote this thing.
You'd almost think the author knew what he was doing.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I know. It's exactly right. Knew how it was going to end.
Why does he have none of these concerns about entering Canaan and having the Canaanite people see how beautiful his wife is?
Exactly right. Okay, so you guys are really getting all these good questions, right? So why wasn't he only worried now? Why wasn't he worried before they left for Egypt? Why wasn't he worried when they actually came to Canaan? Why wasn't he worried in Haran? Like I said, pretty women have been a subject of violence all over the world through all of human history. What's happening here that's creating the problem?
Were the Canaanites there in power then, or were they kind of...
The Canaanite city-states were throughout the land of Canaan, and they were the local authorities, yes.
And it seems they were fairly weak.
Well, Egypt always loomed as a shadow over the land, as did the empires to the north and to the east at different times. Back and forth, this land of Canaan, what becomes Israel, was always in between two great empires, at least, sometimes more than two. But it itself was never a great empire. Well, I think we're a little bit better off now than we were back then.
But they're still there.
Yes.
Maybe it wasn't such a surprise that there was famine in the land, and that is what allows him to feel confident to come into Canaan, because people are weak. I mean, they have no food. They have other things on their mind.
Right. They're not going to kill me to take my wife. They might kill me to take my food, but they're not going to tell me to take my wife. So indeed, that could be an issue, that he didn't feel in jeopardy in Canaan. So let's go ahead and first just take about why is there this problem at all. So Radak gives us an answer from our tradition.
This was one of the 10 trials Avram was subjected to by God. He successfully mastered all of them. He never second-guessed God, thinking that if God had done things differently, it would have been better, especially better for him. He could have said that God had said to him that all the nations of the earth would be blessed through his presence. And if so, how did his presence help them if he now had to face a famine? He did not question.
Right? It's Radak's answer of, what is this? It's a test of faith. Right? The famine was there just so God could see, or more specifically, so that Abraham and others would see the depth of Abraham's faith. Because Abraham doesn't complain. He shows up in this new land after having been offered this as a blessing, and there's a famine. He just goes, oh, there's a famine. I guess we'll have to leave for a while. He doesn't say, God! Because he has faith that what God has promised will come true despite this momentary setback. Maybe? We're going to come back to that. If he had faith, then ...
Why was he worried for his life?
Exactly. If he had faith, why was he worried for his life? If he had faith, why was he worried for his wife? If he had faith, why leave? Right? I mean, if he has faith that God is going to provide for him, then shouldn't he have been able to stand and just wait out the famine?
But didn't God tell him to leave?
God did not say leave. God told him to leave Haran and come to Canaan. God did not tell him go from Canaan and go to Egypt. So we're going to come back to that. But
well, that could answer your question.
But
God didn't tell him to go. That's why.
So no wonder he was afraid. If you not doing what God's told you to do, then yeah, that's.
So you want me the next one?
Yes.
Abraham went down to Egypt due to hunger, to live there temporarily in order to save his life in the days of drought. And the Egyptians exploited him without cause to get his wife. And the Holy One of Blessing avenged them with great afflictions and brought him out with riches. And it is a hint from Abraham, since his children went down to Egypt because of hunger, to live temporarily in the land, and the Egyptians did evil to them and took their wives.
As Malka was saying.
Everything that was written regarding Abraham was also written regarding his descendants. Regarding Abraham, it is written, and there was famine in the land. Regarding Israel, it is written, this is already 2 years of famine in all the land.
Which is the story of Joseph and his brothers and how we all end up in Egypt to become slaves in the first place before the whole Exodus happens. So why did he go?
But maybe I'm jumping ahead and getting off,
It's okay.
but we went to Egypt and it says they did evil to us.
Mm-hmm.
We went to Egypt and stayed because it was so comfortable. Didn't have to stay. It was the Israelites' choice
Right.
to stay.
What was a sojourn became a much longer stay.
Became
Yes.
a settlement.
Mm-hmm.
So when you settle in a land that's not yours and you become very numerous,
Right.
you have a problem.
But think for a moment about why they stayed and why he's going to Egypt. Why is he going to Egypt?
Because it's a land of plenty.
Why is Egypt a land of plenty when Canaan isn't? They're right next door to each other. The Nile River. Right? And throughout Jewish history and throughout Jewish thinking, the Nile is considered the antithesis of the land of Israel. The Nile Valley versus the land of Israel are two different ways of living and two different forms of mind that lead to two different types of spirituality. The Nile is self-sufficiency through self-work, right? You bring the water up, you put the water in your field, the water's always there, you've got it going. Israel? How does Israel get its water? From rain. Right? Yes, there are some springs that can be tapped from time to time, but that's mostly more for drinking than for agriculture because of the quantities required. It is the rains that bring the water to Israel. So on the one hand, it's a lot less work. You're not hauling the water up into the hills to water it. You're just waiting for it to fall from the sky. On the other hand, you're waiting for it to fall from the sky. And if it don't fall, you get famine. And so Egypt absolutely could have food aplenty while Canaan was starving and starving and starving. And we see the temptation to say, I know I've got a blessing here, but it's a unreliable blessing-ish, or each individual day, it's still a little bit of doubt. Whereas the Nile, it's not so much a blessing, but I know I can always get enough. I know I can make it work. And that's where he's going towards, and to take care of the need of the moment. But the need of the moment can become a trap for the future, right? It seems like a good idea at the time, but once you get comfortable, it works here. It's not so bad. Maybe I shouldn't head back north just yet. I'm sure we can get an extension on our hotel room. And they stay much longer than expected, which is why Ramban goes on to say that this was a flaw, that Avram should not have gone.
And you should know that our father Abraham committed a great sin unintentionally, in which he brought his righteous wife to stumble into transgression because of his fear of getting killed, and he should have trusted the name to have saved him, his wife, and all that was his, because God has power to help and to save. Also, his going out from the land of which he had been commanded at the beginning, due to famine, was a transgression that he committed, because God would have saved him from dying in a famine. And because of this deed, it was decreed that his seed would be in exile in Egypt under the hand of Pharaoh.
All right, so Ramban, Radak, our first commentator and the one that Kathy just read, agree or disagree about him on this trial? Disagree. Ramban says he failed. The test was, I've brought you to this land and there's a famine. Let's see what you do. Will you have faith in me that I've said you will be a blessing, I've said that this land is good, and that you will survive the famine? Or are you going to go running off because there's something better down the way? And remember, that is kind of what his family history has been. Right? Terach has been moving. Right? They came from Ur to Haran, and then now from Haran to Canaan. They are a nomadic family. That's the family history. So is he going to stay nomadic, or will he recognize that the boundaries of Israel are his new boundaries? And you don't get to jump ship when it's rough. And apparently Ramban says he jumped ship. And that was a sin. In fact, it was such a sin that it was that reason why we ended up as slaves in Egypt. Right? That was the immediate trigger that creates the punishment of our people in the land of Egypt.
It's like the tension between putting your faith in God,
Mm-hmm.
considering men to be like God. In Egypt, man controls taking the water, doing everything, and Pharaoh epitomizes that as the man God.
Right.
Whereas when you stay in the land of Israel, you have to put your faith in God, and
that's it. And that's it. That's what faith means in that context. Right? It's not you put your faith and then you also, it's you put your faith in and you wait.
well, you meet God.
Yeah. And we're gonna talk about halfway a little bit. But Ramban's biggest criticism here, though, is not just that he showed a lack of faith, but who did he put in jeopardy by his lack of faith? His wife. Right? It wasn't just that Abraham stepped across the line and lacked faith and all of that. It's his lack of faith put his wife in such a horrible position. And it's that's triggering this punishment. That look what you did to your wife because you didn't have faith that I would come through for you. Look what she has to go through. Look at her. Now, which is going to bring us to this middle section for our class. And this is totally missing from our translations. So you're going to have to bear with me here a little bit. We're going to go back and look in some Hebrew that JPS erased for us to make life easier. So if you go back to verse 11, right, we have this wonderful line. And as he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, I know what a beautiful woman you are. Right? Well, in the Hebrew, I know what a beautiful woman you are. He actually says, Hine na yadati. Hine na means like, behold, now, or please, yadati, I knew. It's the past tense form of knowing. What's the na? What's the now that's been left out of here? Because you could have written this as saying, and he said to his wife Sarai, behold, now I know what a beautiful woman you are. Does that mean now? Is that yesterday you didn't? Or does that mean now as we are about to enter the land of Egypt? Or is now just an intensifier, like in English we might say, something like, now I know how beautiful you are. It's just like an obvious statement, and you're using it as an intensifier for how obvious the knowledge must be. JPS has taken out the na for us, has taken out this word, and just said, I know. We're going to put it back in because the commentators are going to town on it as an understanding of their relationship and an understanding of this whole transition towards Egypt. So remember the na.
That's where you get, I am well aware.
Okay, sorry, thank you for pointing that out. I've in the different commentators that talk about this, I have bolded the word that they're using that was translated or added because of the na. So the well in our first quote here, I am well aware, the well emphasis was added as the translation of the na.
I am well aware that you are a beautiful woman. Meaning, I know that because you are a beautiful woman, as soon as they see you, they will kill me and take you to the king's palace to be part of his harem. In order to save my life, say that you are my sister instead of my wife. Although the Egyptians are idolaters, they observed the law of not sleeping with someone else's wife. As a result, they resorted to murder instead. This sounds strange, as the same lawgiver that prohibited adultery also prohibited murder. Their reasoning was that it is better to murder and commit that sin once than to commit the sin of adultery day after day.
Logical?
Yeah, sure. Besides, they were afraid that any husband whose wife had been kidnapped would complain to their respective kings about this. Once the original husband was dead, no restitution could be made.
Right? No one ever said they were dummies. Right? So how is the na working in this? What's he mean by now I know?
You just realized.
It's not just realized for this commentator. It's the intensity of her beauty. Right? He is paying her the ultimate compliment to say, look, I know how beautiful you are. And they are just going to eat you up. And when they eat you up, they're going to spit out my bones. So because you are so beautiful, we need to come up with this plan. And the plan is basically, as we've talked about, say you're my sister, because if you say you're my husband or wife, you'll just kill me. And if they kill me, then yes, they'll marry you, and then you'll be happily married to some horrible Egyptian.
Instead, I can use you as a bargaining chip and get so many goats and sheep.
Well, the bargaining happens as a result of the reaction and as a result of God's assistance, right? There's no indication. It is important to realize there's no indication that he would deliberately try to sell her as a wife and then get money in exchange for him, because he had no way of knowing what would happen. The main plan here was pretend to be my sister. And that way they won't just kill me on sight.
Right.
And we'll deal with everything else.
Right. I take my time negotiating.
Right. Well, and until the famine's over, and then we can leave. If people come and say, "Oh, we'd like to marry her. She's your sister," he has the right to refuse as the male head of household. He could say, "Well, actually, she's betrothed to someone else, or we're not looking to get married, or you need to offer much more." The problem, of course, from the story is that it's Pharaoh that ends up wanting her. And if Pharaoh hadn't entered in, he probably would have gotten away with this perfectly fine. If it weren't for Pharaoh, who kind of has law of the land on his side to make the law of the land as he wants, Avram probably could have avoided all the messy details that we see. So it wasn't that bad a plan, right? Because she was so beautiful, na yadati, right? Because she was so beautiful, he knew there would be trouble, and his plan really, without Pharaoh getting involved, probably would have worked fine.
You couldn't mess up her hair and put dirt on her face.
There are some people that no matter how much you mess them up, they're still just too pretty.
Yeah.
It's just the way it is.
Yeah. Wouldn't know about that.
I think he's saying sort of like, I just realized how beautiful you are. This scheme just came to my mind.
Bava Batra, our next text.
Turn the page. Abraham didn't even stare at his own wife. Behold, now I know that you're a beautiful woman. Meaning up to then, he had not even stared at her.
I never really looked at her that way.
Which could be why they're
Well. For those of you who couldn't hear that could be why they were still childless. So I don't want to jump to he took her for granted, because he certainly seems very solicitous of her, and he's putting a lot of faith in her that she is not going to out him and he'll end up dead. But let's just say that he wasn't especially interested in her for her physical qualities. Right? Maybe that's a bit more of a polite way of saying it. That he always looked at her as being his wife, and he loved her dearly, but he didn't look at her as the way a man would look at a woman for acquisition just for the physical appearance. Remember, the worry here isn't that someone in Egypt is going to fall in love with her because she's so nice. The worry here is someone's going to want her, lust after her, just because of the appearance. And he loves her because of who she is, not because of how she looks. And now he's just realizing that he's walking around with a loaded gun. that she is going to just set off all of these Egyptian guys. And he never thought about it like that before.
And also, she's going to be the unique one in Egypt, as opposed to one of many like her. Let's say everybody was beautiful, but she
right.
would be different. And when you're different, it sometimes highlights what your physical traits are.
Absolutely, and we're going to get to that commentator that makes the same point of you, that there was a uniqueness of Sarah in the land of Egypt that exacerbated how much she stood out. And I can tell you from personal experience in Japan, that Westerners in Japan stand out, and there are many people, many Japanese people who are very interested in dating Westerners for that reason, and often will have a very different standard of beauty than that person would have been perceived in a Western country. So someone who's not really considered to be, a 10 on the beauty scale can go to Japan, and all of a sudden they're being fawned over as though they were, because the exoticness of their appearance is nice. And of course, we see the opposite. In this country, we have many people who prefer certain physical types as well. Even if in the native ethnic culture, that person may not have been a standout beauty. Their uniqueness might just be the trigger for the reaction. But there definitely seems to be in Baba Batra a sudden realization of looking at his wife in a way that he'd never looked at her before, and realizing the danger. So there, the na is really the literal nowness of this realization. Radak's uncomfortable with that, because that, as you say, kind of means that he didn't really understand his wife. So he's going to try and soften that a bit by reading this text.
Even though the word na generally describes a knowledge which one has just acquired, Avram did not want Sarai to think that he had only now discovered her good looks. He therefore used a formulation which indicated that he had been aware of her beauty ever since he had first met her. Similar constructions without the addition of yadati, I know, I knew, in the past tense are found in 19:2, now my lords, or in 19:19, now that your servant has found favor. Thus, the addition of yadati reassures her that he had not only suddenly discovered that she was beautiful.
Right. So that he adds in that I know, in order to make sure that she knows that he's always known. Which leaves us with the question then, so what's the nowness of this? Right? He could have just said, now, behold, you are beautiful. That would be a perfectly fine Hebrew phrase. The word yadati is not needed. He doesn't need to say, I know that you are beautiful. He can just say, nah, you're beautiful. And as we see from chapter 19, he uses that phrase quite fine to give an exclamation of a new realization. He doesn't want her to think this is a new realization. But there is definitely something new that is happening here. I know you're beautiful. I've always known you're beautiful. But just now a thought occurred to me. So now we have to figure out, well, what is that new thought if it's not a realization of her physical attractiveness?
We have traveled from Avram Naharayim and Nahor.
Sorry, that should be Aram Nahor. I don't know why.
And not found a woman as beautiful as you.
Right. So what he's realizing, according to Bereshit Rabbah, is now that I have gone the length and the breadth of this whole part of the civilized world, I've always known you were beautiful. I didn't realize that there was no one comparable to you.
Because I hadn't seen so many other people.
Exactly. It's, in my village, you were the prettiest girl I'd ever seen. And I've been traveling for a while now, and I'm beginning to realize that wasn't just for my village. You were the prettiest girl actually in the whole city. And we left the city, we moved to a new country, and I walked the whole length of the country. And you were still the prettiest girl I'd ever seen. And now we're coming up to Egypt, and I'm seeing a bunch of travelers from Egypt going back and forth. And you're still the prettiest woman. We're in trouble. We're in trouble. I knew you were pretty. I didn't realize you were Miss Universe. And coming into Egypt with all the stuff I've heard about the Egyptians, I thought I could get by with a pretty girl, but with a Miss Universe, I'm a dead man. So it's not that I didn't know you were pretty. I didn't know how much prettier you were in comparison to the rest of the world. That's the na that Bereshit Rabbah is giving us there. It's just now I've realized the comparison between you and everyone else. How are we doing for Abraham? Good husband? Bad husband? It's uncomfortable still. What's that?
Pragmatic.
Pragmatic, yes. And perhaps he made a miscalculation, right? Because by having the na be, I didn't really understand this completely. We can maybe understand why he's coming up with this plan at the very last minute. Remember the beginning of verse 11, right? As he was about to enter the land of Egypt. If this was the plan, shouldn't they have begun the charade before they even left Canaan? All right, we're heading down to Egypt. It's going to be a while before we get there, but let's just keep practicing. You call me brother, I call you sister. You call me. You don't do this when you're in the passport line, right? You work this out well in advance. But there's a definite not-ness. There's a now-ness that seems to be causing this plan to be formulated. And Radak, again, I think this has some great commentary on this whole section, tries to put it in perspective for us.
Had Avram been aware of this situation, he would never have set out on his journey towards Egypt, but would have been content to endure the famine, just as did most of the other inhabitants of the land of Canaan. He most certainly would not have put his wife at risk.
All right, so make sure what Radak is basically saying here is he left because he didn't realize that it was going to be this bad. Right? He said, oh, look, there's a famine in the land. You know, it'd be a lot easier if we just go down to Egypt. They've always got food. We'll head down to Egypt. And as they're going, he's going, I'm hearing all these stories about Egypt being a really horrible place where they'll murder you rather than, you know, rape your wife, because that's their morale. And that's got me worried. And now I'm beginning to realize, as I've traveled more of the world, just how stunningly beautiful you are. You know, dear, we're kind of in the wrong place and the wrong time. And we're going to have to come up with a backup plan. So here's what we're going to do.
He could have turned around.
He could have turned around, but one wonders about supplies, you know, of whether or not they had enough for the journey to Egypt, but not necessarily enough for the return journey if they didn't get across the border, go through the border control and all of that, and begin purchasing. So there's a real sense now of, oops.
Yeah.
Rather than being a calculated plan, it's the, oh dear. This isn't what I planned. This isn't what I thought was going to happen. He made a mistake. He underestimated his wife's beauty. He overestimated the morality of Egypt. And we still have this question of whether or not he should have stayed in the land of Canaan anyway and trusted God. But now that he's in this point, he's made his bed, he has to lie in it. Or more to the point, he has to keep other people from lying in it. That was meant to be a pun. Okay, onward.
Even now, Avram was not concerned that Sarai might be exposed to many rapes, something which would not have been tolerated even in Egypt. He was afraid that the Egyptians would commit only a single act of violence, namely to murder him. And anyone sleeping with her would not violate the local laws of the sanctity of marriage.
Right, so he's worried, as we've talked about from the earlier comment, you know, he's worried that they're just going to kill me and make it easy. They're not going to rape her, they're going to marry her. But they're going to marry her over my dead body. Literally, over my dead body. And that's not great for her, of course, because, you know, she'll be widowed and forced to marry someone else. But it's a lot better than what's going to happen to me. At least she'll be treated as a respected and prized wife. Whereas I'll be dead. And that's a bad thing. So we're going to come up with a solution that hopefully can avoid both of those situations. So again, this is why he's not worried that with her being his sister, that they're going to take her and rape her, because he doesn't think that that's how the Egyptians would act. They're going to want to marry her, and that, you know, he can stretch out enough and then get away. It should work, except for Pharaoh. But we still have this hanging question.
As to why he did not trust God, who had promised to make him into a great nation, a promise that had not yet begun to be fulfilled, and preferred to resort to subterfuge, this is not surprising.
By the way, every time a commentator says this is not surprising, it is surprising. Right? It's one of those phrases like it goes without saying. That usually means I don't know how to say it. Or I don't know how to prove it. So if a commentator says it's not surprising, it means, actually, I was kind of surprised when I read this, but I've come up with a good explanation of why it's not surprising. So if it's surprising to you, yeah, me too. But trust me, there's a good explanation. Here it is.
We find that Jacob also took extreme precautions in spite of having been given many reassurances by God. The promises by God are based on man having taken every reasonable precaution not to require a miracle to save him from danger. When one is aware that one finds oneself in a situation where danger to one's life is likely, one must first take every precaution at one's disposal to counter such danger. Our sages have told us that it is inadmissible to sit with one's hands in one's hands, waiting for God to perform a miracle to save one's life. They base this advice on the verse in Deuteronomy 6:16. Do not put the Lord your God in a position of having to perform a miracle for you. We learn from many examples how a righteous person must behave when he faces danger in in carrying out what he knows to be God's will. One does not leave matters to miracles.
So he got himself in a tricky situation. And even leaving from the famine in the first place doesn't seem like a bad idea with what Doc is trying to tell us. So he's saying, okay, yeah, I could stay along with the rest of the Canaanites. And I have faith that, yes, God would bring me through this famine. But am I really supposed to force God to do a miracle to make sure that I survive this famine, me and my family? Shouldn't I do what is reasonable since I have the resources and the capacity to travel and just go somewhere where there's food, buy food and be okay? And it's only as he's about to enter the land of Egypt that he begins to realize that he's made a blunder in assessing the relative danger. That in fact, Egypt is more dangerous than the risk of famine. If he'd realized how dangerous Egypt was, he would have stayed where he was and trusted his luck and God's help in Canaan. But he thought he was helping God make it easier to keep him alive. He just didn't know. Remember, he's new to the neighborhood. He didn't know that where he was going was not the place you go when you're looking for help.
So he learned about Egypt's immorality as he traveled south, let's say through the Negev, from people he met.
Exactly. Well, the juxtaposition of as he was about to enter Egypt with this sudden introduction of this subterfuge is often pointed to as saying it was only by then that he realized what position they were in, that this was not a safer alternative. It looked safer, right? It looked safer.
When he made the decision, it probably was the best decision he could make.
Except for one part.
Not trusting in God.
No, the trusting in God, you can trust in God and go to Egypt, you can trust in God and stay, but you should trust in God while making the best choice you can. But what was the one piece that he had really miscalculated, according to all these commentators, that would have perhaps changed his decision?
How beautiful his wife was.
How beautiful his wife was, right? The big mistake he made was he didn't really understand how beautiful his wife was. Because she's the problem. And if he'd been going with some ugly cow, he would have been left alone, no problem, just one more refugee from the famine, walking through the gates and get the food, no problem. And it's because he didn't really understand how she would be seen by the whole rest of the world.
He didn't see her as a woman, but as his wife.
Correct. Exactly. And that's not a bad thing generally for marriage, in the sense that to love her regardless of how she looks, and to love her because of who she is rather than because she was the prettiest girl in the town, that is to his credit. But when you're making life and death security decisions, you have to think, what will my enemies think if you're going to make a good decision?
So I'm sitting here giggling because I am several chapters ahead in my mind. So the next time he has this, existential decision to make about Ishmael, God says, whatever Sarah says, you do.
Yeah.
I'm not trusting your decision making anymore.
Yeah, just go with your wife. Just go with your wife.
Whatever she says, you do.
Right, and the Midrash, by the way, does introduce, in case you're wondering, well, why doesn't he just hide her? The Midrash does introduce the idea that he did try to hide her, and he put her into a box and pretended like she was just coming in as part of the goods that he had with him. And the customs official said, well, I got to charge you duty on what's in the box. And he said, okay, charge me whatever the rate is. And he says, well, you could be hiding garments in there. He says, I'll pay whatever the rate is for clothes. And he says, well, you could be hiding jewels in there. He says, I'll pay whatever the rate is for jewels. If you imagine a whole box, a human-sized box full of jewels. He was willing to pay a lot. And the guy says, no, I got to open the box. And when he opened the box, her light shone all across the land. And of course, Pharaoh heard, and now we're in trouble. So yeah, he made a boo-boo. Yeah. And his boo-boo was because he didn't see his wife clearly enough.
The interesting thing is the Bible shows our patriarchs and matriarchs with all their big ugly warts.
This isn't a big ugly wart.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is, depending on how you're looking at it.
From the woman's perspective.
Yes.
I can certainly understand that this is
But
This
it's
is a
not
major
the-
problem.
Imagine the conversation on the way out of Egypt.
Oh,
I'm never letting you drive again. The last time I let you drive, you know where we ended up?
You know, it's really an interesting, they're not glorified.
They're definitely not glorified. They are not deified and made
No,
into
they're
some
not
demigods of
deified
perfection.
at all.
Absolutely. But what I do want to just drive home is that think of the position he was in. Right? He's looking around at Canaan saying, "There's a famine going on here. If I stay, yes, I know God will support me, but what hardship will my family endure?" Right? My wife and I and our all the people that we are with, because remember, he has this whole
Right.
community with them.
Yes, a retinue.
Exactly. This is entourage. We're gonna go hungry, and some of them may die. Maybe I won't, and maybe Sarai won't, but we'll still suffer through the famine. So why wouldn't I just go where there's food? And the answer, of course, is you wouldn't, because Egypt is an immoral place, and your wife is going to be like red meat to a Doberman. But he wasn't thinking of that. He was thinking of protecting them. And we can imagine, if we want to put Sarai in that role, you can imagine her saying, "Why are we sitting here starving to death when they have food in Egypt? Can't we just jump on the camels, go down to Egypt, buy a couple bushels and come back? I mean, really, you're going to make us stay here?" And he's going, no, dear, because, I've heard bad things about Egypt. Oh, come on, how bad can it? I mean, we could imagine very easily the opposite story of Abraham and Sarah almost starving to death rather than going across the street and going into the Egyptian store and buying some food. So he made the calculation. And the part that was missing...
It still was wrong.
Yeah.
And that's it.
And that's the final word.
And that's it.
That's it.
What is it? What is definitely it? And the final word from the commentators that I do want to drive home is the idea that when we make a decision like this, A, that we're not relying upon the miracle to do it for us, but B, that we try to make our decision with our eyes as open and as clear as possible. That in the current situation in Israel, in the current debates within our own country, with the current discussions within our own community about what is happening and what not, down to our own families, we often don't see completely what is going on, or in particular, we don't see it from how others are looking at things. And that will sometimes blind us when we're making our calculations. And Avram here, he was missing an important piece of the puzzle. And we can say whether it was good or bad that he didn't really see his wife the way these other guys were going to see him. But he needed to see her that way, at least for the purposes of figuring out the safest route for his family. And he didn't have to treat her as they would have treated her, but he did have to have that information. And sometimes we willfully choose to ignore the information of our adversaries, whether it be true life and death adversaries, that sometimes we will give the benefit of the doubt when in fact no doubt is needed. They really do want to hurt us, and we should take them at face value. And sometimes we will give the benefit of the doubt or take away the benefit of the doubt of friends or family that we are in arguments with refusing to see it from their point of view. So this now yadati, now I know, is a very important phrase to get earlier in the conversation, not at the border of Egypt, right? The realizations, the understanding should come before the decision is made, not after. And that is the final word.
Yes.
All right, take care, everyone. Keep your eyes open. At the very least, look at your spouses a little different.